At noon on a quiet Macau beach, the sea returned something it should have kept forever. The beach at Haksa was not supposed to hold secrets. At midday, it was a place of sunburned tourists, shallow laughter, and the constant rhythm of waves breaking against dark sand. The air smelled of salt and sunscreen. Children ran along the shore. Vendors shouted half-hearted offers. Nothing about that afternoon suggested violence. Nothing warned of what the tide had chosen to bring back. A local swimmer noticed it first. Something pale drifted near the waterline, bobbing gently with each retreating wave. From a distance it appeared unremarkable. After storms, the sea often returned dead animals. The man assumed this was no different. He waded closer, reached down, and turned it over. The moment stretched, then stopped. What surfaced was not an animal. It was human. A severed arm, cut cleanly at the shoulder, its skin bloated and blanched by seawater. The hand hung limp, fingers half-curled, as if frozen in a final unfinished gesture. The beach fell silent. Someone screamed. Within minutes, the shoreline was sealed off, and the illusion of an ordinary day collapsed under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. Police arrived quickly. Forensic technicians followed. Under the harsh light of the Macau sun, the arm was examined where it lay. Decomposition was advanced. The tissue had softened, the edges swollen from prolonged exposure to salt and heat. Initial estimates placed the limb in the water for at least 48 hours. This was not a recent accident. It was something older, something deliberate. Then the sea continued its confession. Within hours, another discovery was made several hundred meters away. A severed foot. Over the next 3 days, the search expanded along the entire coastline. Divers entered the water. Patrol boats traced slow, methodical paths offshore. Each morning, the tide returned more evidence. By the end of the operation, 11 human body parts had been recovered. 4 right feet, 2 left feet, 4 hands, 1 detached heel. The list alone was enough to unsettle even seasoned investigators. But the true horror lay in what the autopsies revealed. These were not injuries caused by propellers or marine animals. The bones showed smooth, precise cut marks. Joints had been separated with accuracy. There were no jagged fractures, no hesitation. Each incision suggested strength, control, and repetition. This was not panic. This was procedure. The conclusion was unavoidable. The victims had been killed elsewhere, then methodically dismembered to facilitate disposal. Whoever did this understood the human body. They understood how to reduce it, how to erase it. As forensic teams attempted to identify the dead, another barrier emerged. The fingers, though recovered, were useless. The skin where fingerprints should have been was destroyed, not by water alone. The damage was intentional. Crushed, burned, scraped beyond recognition. That detail changed everything. It meant the killer had anticipated the investigation. It meant this was not only an act of violence, but an act of planning. The question was no longer whether a crime had been committed. That was already certain. The question was no longer how they died. It was why no one was looking for them. Part 1. No one came looking. The recovery of the body parts should have triggered panic across Macau. A crime of this scale, involving multiple victims and deliberate dismemberment, normally leaves behind a long trail of absence. Families report loved ones missing. Employers ask questions. Neighbors notice silence where there was once routine. None of that happened. As the sea surrendered its evidence, investigators turned inland, expecting a flood of missing persons reports. They searched police databases, hospital records, and immigration logs. Days passed. Then weeks. Still nothing surfaced. No families stepped forward. No frantic phone calls. No unanswered school enrollments. No abandoned jobs reported to authorities. It was as if the dead had never existed. By early September, the case was formally designated a special investigation. The pressure was intense. Macau was small. News traveled quickly. Tourists continued to walk the beaches where limbs had been recovered. Hotels filled. Casinos thrived. Yet beneath the city's neon calm, investigators faced a problem that defied logic. How could multiple people be murdered without anyone noticing they were gone? The forensic findings only deepened the mystery. Based on the number of right feet recovered, the minimum victim count was estimated at 4. But the sizes of the limbs told a more disturbing story. Some belonged to adults. Others were smaller. At least one was consistent with a child. Footwear found near the shoreline suggested both male and female victims. The estimate rose. 5. Then more. Still, no reports. Police widened the net. They reviewed every missing person case filed in Macau during the relevant months. None matched. Cooperation requests were sent to Hong Kong authorities, then to public security bureaus in southern mainland China. Thousands of records were cross-checked. The result was the same every time. 0. As weeks turned into months, the case began to stall. Investigators had no primary crime scene, no murder weapon, no witnesses, and now no identities. The body parts were eventually buried in a public cemetery, marked only by numbers instead of names. Cold codes replaced human lives. Inside police headquarters, optimism faded. Files were reorganized. Leads were quietly downgraded. The case hovered on the edge of becoming something far more dangerous than an unsolved crime. It risked becoming forgotten. That silence persisted for 8 months. Then, in the spring of the following year, it broke. On a quiet morning, both the Macau Judiciary Police and the Interpol Liaison Office in Guangzhou received the same document. It was handwritten. The paper showed signs of being folded and unfolded repeatedly, as if the writer had hesitated many times before sending it. The letter came from Zhongshan County, Guangdong Province. The author identified himself as Zheng Feng. He claimed to be the younger brother of a businessman named Zheng Lam, who had been living and working in Macau. The tone of the letter was restrained but anxious, written by someone attempting to sound rational while fearing the worst. "My brother has not contacted our family for over 6 months," the letter read. "This is not normal. He has never gone more than a month without calling." Zheng Lam, according to the letter, owned and operated a restaurant in Macau known as the Eight Immortals Restaurant. He lived there with his wife, children, extended family members, and trusted employees. In May of the previous year, all communication stopped. At first, the family assumed business obligations were the cause. But time passed. Calls went unanswered. Letters were returned. When Zheng Feng traveled to Macau to investigate, he discovered something that shattered his assumptions. The restaurant was no longer in his brother's hands. It had been taken over by a man named Wang Chi Hang. According to Wang, Zheng Lam had sold the business to settle gambling debts. He claimed the entire family had emigrated to Brazil shortly afterward. The explanation was delivered casually, as if it required no further clarification. To Zheng Feng, it made no sense. His brother had never mentioned plans to leave Asia. None of the children had been withdrawn from school. Most troubling of all, official documents belonging to the family were still registered in Macau. There were no immigration records showing their departure. The letter ended with a single request. Please help me find out what happened to my brother and his family. And for the investigators, the impact was immediate. The timeline aligned perfectly. The family's disappearance in May matched the estimated period when the dismembered remains had entered the sea. The lack of missing persons reports now had a terrifying explanation. If an entire household vanished at once, there would be no one left to report them missing. The case was reopened in full. Police reviewed the letter's claims and began verifying the identities listed. What they found sent a chill through the department. 10 names emerged. Zheng Lam, his wife, their children, elderly relatives, a close family employee. 10 people. Gone. Neighbors near the restaurant confirmed they had not seen the family for months. There had been no farewell. No moving trucks. No signs of preparation. Immigration records showed no legal exit from Macau for any of them. They had not left. They had simply disappeared. The investigation now had a direction. It also had a singular point of focus. One man stood at the center of everything that remained. The man who had taken their place. 10 people vanished without a single goodbye. Part 2. The only man who benefited. Once the investigation had a name, it also had a direction. The Eight Immortals Restaurant was no longer just a location tied to the missing family. It became the gravitational center of the case. Everything that had vanished now pointed back to that building and to the man who had taken control of it. Wang Qihong had assumed ownership openly. There was no attempt at secrecy. He presented himself as a legitimate buyer who had simply stepped into an abandoned opportunity. According to his version of events, Zheng Lam was drowning in gambling debt. The restaurant, the residence, and associated assets had been transferred as part of a private settlement. Shortly afterward, the entire Zheng family had left Macau to start a new life overseas. On paper, it sounded plausible. In reality, it unraveled quickly. Investigators began by reconstructing the timeline of the takeover. Wang had dismissed every employee who previously worked under Zheng Lam. Not gradually. Immediately. The staff was replaced with new faces, none of whom had any prior connection to the family. This alone raised concern. In Macau's tightly woven business districts, such abrupt changes were rare and deeply suspicious. Wang did not stop with the restaurant. He moved into the Zheng family residence as if it had always belonged to him. He collected rent from an apartment owned by Zheng Lam and used the family's vehicle as his own. There were no records of asset liquidation, no proper transfer documentation consistent with a voluntary sale. The Zheng family had not merely disappeared from their business. They had been erased from their own lives. Police surveillance began quietly. For weeks, officers observed Wang's routines. He ran the restaurant efficiently. Business hours were extended. Revenue remained steady. To customers and suppliers, nothing seemed wrong. The absence of the previous owners went unquestioned, accepted as another unremarkable turnover in a city accustomed to reinvention. What struck investigators most was Wang's demeanor. He showed no signs of anxiety. No effort to distance himself from the property. He did not behave like a man who feared discovery. If anything, his confidence bordered on indifference. That composure suggested either innocence or something far more dangerous. Someone who believed the crime could not be proven. The turning point came from forensic persistence. Among the 11 body parts recovered from the sea, one fragment had yielded a partial fingerprint. It was incomplete and degraded, but enough had survived to preserve a recognizable pattern. For months it had gone unmatched. Now, with a list of specific missing individuals, it had purpose. Investigators focused on Chan Lai-chun, known to neighbors as Aunt Nine, a relative who lived separately from the Jung household. Though not residing at the restaurant, she had vanished at the same time. Officers searched her former residence for latent prints left behind on everyday objects. The match was absolute. The fingerprint recovered from the beach belonged to her. With that confirmation, uncertainty ended. The remains found at Haksa were not anonymous victims. They were members of the Jung family. The case officially shifted from a missing persons investigation to a mass murder inquiry. Attention returned to Wang Qihang. Investigators gathered testimonies from individuals who had seen the family shortly before their disappearance. A poultry delivery worker recalled making a routine delivery to the restaurant on the afternoon of May 4th. Zheng Lam had accepted the goods and paid as usual. Everything appeared normal. When the delivery worker returned the following morning, the restaurant was closed. A hastily written sign announced a 3-day closure. Another witness, a neighbor of Aunt Nine, provided a chilling account. In the early hours of May 5th, a young man knocked on her door. He claimed that the Jung family's youngest child was gravely ill and that the family urgently needed her help. Aunt Nine followed him. She was never seen again. The implication was clear. Whoever orchestrated the disappearance had returned to eliminate the final loose end. By late May, police were prepared to act. Surveillance tightened. Wang began to notice. Unfamiliar faces appeared near the restaurant more frequently. His movements were observed. The calm that once defined his behavior shifted subtly toward caution. On the afternoon of May 28th, he packed lightly and left the restaurant with his daughter. He did not head toward the airport. Instead, he drove toward the border, attempting to cross into mainland China through Zhuhai. He did not make it. Plainclothes officers intercepted him at the checkpoint. Wang offered no resistance. His denial was immediate and controlled. He insisted he was only traveling to visit relatives. He claimed ignorance of the investigation. At the interrogation room, he remained composed. There were no bodies, no murder weapon, no witnesses who had seen him kill anyone. He believed the law could not touch him. Then the investigators asked him to place his hands on the table. Under the fluorescent lights, the truth surfaced. His fingertips were destroyed. The skin was thickened and scarred, the ridges flattened beyond recognition. One finger on his left hand was missing an entire segment. When asked to explain the injuries, Wang dismissed them as old kitchen accidents. The explanation did not hold. A search of the restaurant's safe uncovered documents that contradicted his claims entirely. Identification papers, birth certificates, personal records belonging to the Jung family. Items no emigrating family would ever abandon. Wang's narrative began to fracture. Still, he refused to confess. Then information arrived from Hong Kong. The man in custody was not who he claimed to be. Wang Qihang was an alias. His real name was Chan Tsi-leung, and his past was already written in blood. The man who replaced them never acted like someone who feared the truth. Part 3. A man without fingerprints. The revelation from Hong Kong changed the balance of power in the interrogation room. Wang Qihang did not exist. The man sitting across from Macau investigators was someone else entirely. His real name was Chan Tse-leung. The file transmitted from Hong Kong police was thin but devastating. Years earlier, Chan had served briefly as a police officer. His tenure ended abruptly. Violence. Uncontrolled aggression. He was dismissed before his career had time to form, but the training remained. So did the instinct. In 1973, Chan Tse-leung vanished from official records after a fire in a residential building. The blaze was ruled suspicious. A man had been tied up inside and left to burn. By the time authorities arrived, the victim was dead and the suspect was gone. Chan was identified as the primary perpetrator. He escaped before an arrest could be made. For 13 years, he remained unaccounted for. Until now. The mutilation of his hands was no accident. It was strategy. After the fire, Chan understood what would eventually expose him. Fingerprints were permanent. They followed a person across borders, across years. To survive, he made a choice that most people could not comprehend. He destroyed his own identity. Investigators concluded that Chan had burned the skin of his fingertips deliberately. In the case of his left index finger, he went further. The segment had been severed completely. The pain was severe. The damage irreversible. But the result was effective. When he crossed into Macau under a new name, there was nothing left to trace. This detail reframed the entire Eight Immortals case. The victim's fingerprints had been destroyed in the same way. Not by accident. Not by haste. By experience. Chan applied to them what he had once done to himself. It was his signature. A method refined over years of hiding. During questioning, Chan maintained composure. His answers were precise. He admitted to the old crime in Hong Kong, acknowledging the fire and the death. That confession was calculated. By admitting to a known offense, he hoped to lend credibility to his denials regarding the Zheng family. He insisted he had purchased the restaurant legally. He claimed the family left voluntarily. He argued there were no bodies, no witnesses, no proof of murder. Legally, he was not wrong. Macau had no death penalty. Even a conviction would mean life behind bars. Chan understood this. But he also understood something else. Inside prison walls, rules changed. Crimes against children and families carried consequences no sentence could mitigate. When Chan was transferred to the detention facility, word traveled faster than official records. Other inmates knew who he was. They knew what he was accused of. On his first night, he was assaulted in his cell. The beating was severe. Bones cracked. Organs bruised. Guards intervened too late to prevent serious injury. Chan survived. Barely. Within days, the pressure mounted. Interrogations continued. Physical pain merged with psychological collapse. Chan's confidence eroded. He attempted suicide by cutting his wrist with a sharpened piece of metal scavenged from a trash container. He was discovered in time and rushed to the hospital. The attempt failed. Security around him was tightened. Visits were restricted. But desperation does not disappear under supervision. It adapts. In November, Chan received a visit from his wife and son. The meeting was brief. Guards later noted the intensity of their exchange. There were no raised voices, only whispered words and prolonged eye contact. When the visit ended, Chan returned to his cell noticeably calmer. Too calm. Weeks later, before dawn, guards conducting routine checks found him unresponsive. He had fashioned a blade from the aluminum ring of a soft drink can, patiently sharpened against concrete over several nights. This time he cut deeper. He covered himself to conceal the act. He waited. Chan Se-leung died in silence. Beside his body, investigators found 2 letters. One was addressed to the authorities, the other to the press. In them, Chan admitted his true identity and his role in the Hong Kong murder. Then he denied everything else. He claimed innocence in the Eight Immortals case. He cited illness. He framed himself as a man driven to despair by false accusations. The timing of the confession left little doubt. He chose death over judgment. After his death, One final account emerged. A fellow inmate came forward, describing conversations held during Chan's moments of agitation. According to this testimony, the murders began with a gambling debt. An argument escalated. A child was used as leverage. The family was bound. One act of resistance triggered the first killing. After that, there was no turning back. The dismemberment took hours. The disposal was calculated. One relative was lured back the following morning and killed to eliminate the last witness. Everything matched the evidence investigators already had. Years later, construction workers discovered human bones in a landfill. They belonged to the Zheng family. The last physical confirmation arrived too late for a trial. Chan Leong never stood before a judge. He took the truth with him. He chose death before judgment. Death ended the man. It did not end the case. Chan Leong's body was removed from the prison cell before sunrise. There was no spectacle, no final confrontation, only paperwork, photographs, and the quiet certainty that the courts would never hear his name spoken in judgment. The justice system had been denied its moment. What remained was reconstruction. Investigators returned to the evidence one last time. The letters Chan left behind were dissected line by line. His admissions were selective. His denials precise. He acknowledged the crime in Hong Kong because it was already documented. He rejected responsibility for the Eight Immortals murders because he knew what could no longer be proven beyond doubt. This pattern was consistent with his life in hiding. Control the narrative. Concede only what is unavoidable. Carry the rest into silence. The testimony from his former cellmate filled many of the remaining gaps. According to that account, the night of May 4th began as a confrontation over gambling debt. Voices rose. Threats followed. Then Chan seized the youngest child and forced compliance through terror. Rope and fabric were used. One family member resisted. The first killing was immediate. After that, the sequence became mechanical. The murders were carried out one by one. The dismemberment followed. Hours passed in the restaurant kitchen as bodies were reduced into manageable pieces. Large sections were discarded into the sea. Smaller remnants were disposed of elsewhere. One relative, overlooked in the initial slaughter, was lured back the following morning and killed to ensure there would be no witnesses left alive. It was a process driven not by rage alone, but by calculation. For years, a rumor persisted that some of the remains were processed and sold unknowingly to customers. Authorities never confirmed it. No direct evidence survived. But the restaurant's continued operation, in the days following the murders, kept the speculation alive. In Macau, the story became an urban nightmare, passed quietly from one generation to the next. In 1989, 3 years after Chan's death, sanitation workers uncovered human bones at a landfill on the outskirts of the city. Forensic analysis matched them to the Zheng family. The discovery provided physical closure. It did not provide justice. There was no trial. No verdict. No sentence handed down in a courtroom. Chan Leong had chosen to remove himself from that process entirely. By dying, he controlled the final chapter. He ensured that some questions would remain permanently unanswered. For the families of the victims, there was only absence. For investigators, there was resolution without triumph. For the public, there was a lesson that refused to settle comfortably. Some crimes do not end with a confession. They end with a void. When the law cannot speak, memory takes its place. The Eight Immortals case remains in records not because it was fully proven, but because it revealed how easily ordinary spaces can conceal extraordinary violence. A restaurant, a family business, a familiar street. All of it transformed, silently, into a crime scene. And so the final truth lingers, unresolved and unchallenged, carried forward not by verdicts, but by recollection. Some crimes are never proven. They are only remembered,